Ice up, son. Ice up.
That sentence made Steve Smith even more famous, but it also buried one of the most complete receivers of his generation.
By the end of this game, you're going to know who he is.
All the talking, along with the fights and stiff arms from a 5'9" receiver, turned him into a villain. Nobody talked about his 14,000 receiving yards and a Triple Crown that only Jerry Rice and Sterling Sharp had matched at that point. He played his prime on run-first teams with no franchise quarterback and still led the league in receiving yards. Then he signed with the Ravens, tore his Achilles at 36, and dominated all over again. And the only reason he did that was,
and to show you jackasses that at 37 years old, I can still play.
Everything about Steve Smith Sr. says that he should be easily talked about as a top 5 wide receiver all time, but he isn't. He barely scrapes top 10 talks, and we're going over why today. The Panthers drafted Steve Smith out of Utah 74th overall, and a lot of scouts thought that he might just be a return specialist because of his size. He was 5'9" and weighed 184 pounds in the combine, which in 2001 meant most teams looked at him and saw a punt returner, not a real receiver. That size killed his draft stock. Smith started at Santa Monica College before he transferred to Utah, and even there he wasn't some can't-miss prospect. At Santa Monica, he was teammates with Chad Johnson, and their coach told them both to stop partying so much and start playing for a scholarship. By the time he reached Utah, he was putting up 20.6 yards per catch and earning all Mountain West honors. That chip on Smith's shoulder didn't come from nowhere. Every level of football treated him like a spare part until he proved otherwise. The Panthers threw him straight into kick and punt return because they didn't think a 5'9" player could survive on the outside against NFL corners. In his first play as a professional, he took the opening kickoff back for a touchdown. Smith led all rookies with 1,994 net return yards that season. He became the first rookie to make the Pro Bowl as a special teams player since 1993. But the Panthers went 1-15 and nobody outside of Carolina noticed. That season told you everything about what was coming. Steve Smith wasn't just fast, and he didn't just run away from people. He ran like somebody was chasing him because every scout who passed on him and every coach who doubted his size gave him fuel he never forgot. The clues were there in 2001, but a 1-15 team from Carolina doesn't generate a bunch of buzz on national TV. By 2002, Steve had fought his way to a starting receiver spot. He finished that season with 54 catches for 872 yards and 3 TDs, which showed the Panthers they had more than just a return guy. Defenders who tried to press him found out he was stronger than he looked. They still weren't ready to call him a star though, just yet. Here's what people miss about Smith early on. He wasn't some small, quick slot guy who ran away from contract. He wanted to run through arm tackles and stiff arm safeties into the turf rather than dance around them, and that mindset separated him immediately. Scouts love categories, but he broke the mold before anyone realized what the mold was supposed to look like. And that was the pattern for his entire career. He kept doing things that should have made the league pay attention, but Carolina was a small market, the team was often losing, and Smith wasn't doing commercials. He was destroying everybody on tape with nobody watching, and we were missing one of the most competitive players the league had ever seen, which is exactly why 2003 caught everyone off guard. In 2003, Steve wasn't fighting for snaps anymore. He was the guy. That season, he caught 88 passes for 1,110 yards and 7 touchdowns, and more importantly, he helped drag the Panthers to their first NFC title in franchise history. The regular season was strong, but the playoffs were where Smith started to look like a real star, and he belonged on the big stage. The Panthers were winning, and he was the engine that made the entire offense move. In 2003, Jake Delhomme took over as the Panthers quarterback, and the connection he built with Steve Smith became the backbone of the offense. Delhomme wasn't a household name, but he threw with confidence, and Smith rewarded that trust by making plays all over the field. The Panthers finished the regular season 11-5 and won 3 straight playoff games, while Smith was the best player on the field in almost every one of them. The NFC divisional game against the Rams went into double overtime, and the Panthers had the ball on their own 31-yard line. Jake Delhomme dropped back, threw deep, and Smith caught a touchdown pass in stride, outrunning the entire St. Louis secondary for a 69-yard walk-off touchdown. That play ended one of the longest playoff games in NFL history, and it also put notice to the entire world that this 5'9" player was a problem. He finished that game with 6 catches for 163 yards and the touchdown that sent Carolina to the conference title game. A few weeks later, the Panthers were in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. Steve caught 4 passes for 80 yards and a touchdown in a game that came down to a last-second field goal and a 32-29 New England win. The Panthers lost, but Steve had still proven he could produce on the biggest stage in football. He wasn't a fluke, he was a legit problem. That Super Bowl run should have changed how people viewed him, but the story after the game became about Janet Jackson and the halftime show, or the start of the Patriots' potential dynasty, not about the 5'9" receiver who dragged his team there. His combination of speed and physicality was rare then, and it still is now. Then 2004 happened. In the season opener against the Green Bay Packers, Smith broke his leg and his season ended right there. 6 catches for 60 yards and then nothing. The comeback story that was supposed to keep building got cut off before it really even started. 2003 proved Steve Smith was a #1 receiver. 2005 proved he was one of the best to ever do it. Coming off the broken leg, Smith put together a season that only Jerry Rice in 1990 and Sterling Sharp in 1992 had matched in the modern era. He caught 103 passes for 1,563 yards and 12 touchdowns, leading the entire NFL in each category, meaning he won the Triple Crown that season. Only a handful of players have ever done it, and Smith did it the year after a broken leg ended his previous season. He was named Comeback Player of the Year. The Panthers went 11-5 and won the NFC South, and Smith was the single biggest reason why. Jake Delhomme wasn't elite, but he didn't have to be. Steve created separation on his own, caught contested balls in traffic, and turned short passes into long gains with some of the best run after catch ability the league has ever seen. The playoffs that year turned into a personal demonstration. In the wildcard round against the Giants, Smith caught 10 of his 11 targets for 84 yards and a touchdown, and he added a 12-yard rushing score just to remind everybody he could do everything. The Panthers won 23-0. The next week against the Bears, who had one of the best defenses in the entire league that season, he went off for a franchise record 12 catches, 218 yards, and 2 TDs. The Bears had no answer for his speed on deep routes or his strength on quick slants. That 2005 playoff run should be remembered as one of the most dominant stretches up there in wide receiver history. But because the Panthers lost in the NFC Championship, it gets remembered as a footnote instead of a masterclass. That season, he would catch a screen, turn upfield, and throw defensive backs out of his way with one arm. It's not normal receiver behavior. That's running back violence in a wide receiver's role. That performance set up an NFC Championship game against the Seahawks, and Seattle knew exactly who they were dealing with. They double-teamed Smith for most of the game because they recognized he was the only real threat Carolina had. The Seahawks held him to 33 receiving yards on 5 catches, but Steve still found a way to score on a 59-yard punt return. The Panthers lost 34-14, but the message was clear. When Steve Smith was healthy and motivated, you couldn't stop him without dedicating your entire defensive game plan to him. And even then, he still might beat you. But the reason Steve Smith's prime isn't as recognized is because it happened in maybe the middle of the greatest concentration of wide receiver talent the NFL has ever seen. Randy Moss was putting up historic numbers in Minnesota and New England. Terrell Owens was dominating in San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Dallas. Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne were stacking Pro Bowls in Indianapolis with Peyton Manning. Larry Fitzgerald was becoming a legend out in the desert in Arizona. Then Calvin Johnson showed up in Detroit and started doing things that looked physically impossible. All of those guys were either bigger, louder, or on bigger stages than Smith. Moss was 6'4" and ran like a deer. T.O. was 6'3" and built like a tight end. Calvin Johnson was 6'5" and might have been, probably, the most physically gifted receiver in NFL history. Steve Smith was 5'9" and played in Charlotte, which is not exactly the center of the football universe. The Panthers were a run-first, small market team with no national profile, so when Smith put up numbers that matched the best in the league, the country barely noticed. If you compare Smith's 2005 season to Randy Moss's 2003 season in Minnesota, the numbers are close. Moss had 111 catches for 1,632 yards and 17 touchdowns. Smith had 103 catches for 1,563 yards and 12 TDs. The difference is that Moss did it on a team that threw the ball 40 times a game with a quarterback like Dante Culpepper, while Smith did it on a team that wanted to run first and play defense. Randy got all the commercials and the ESPN segments, while Steve got a local newspaper article and a pat on the back. In 2007, Smith led Carolina with 87 catches, 1,002 yards, and 7 touchdowns, all while playing for 4 different quarterbacks that season, which is just insane. Most receivers can't stay productive with one bad quarterback, and Smith did it with 4 different guys under center because Jake Delhomme got hurt. If you aren't on Sunday Night Football or in a major market, the national media finds other stories to tell. Then in 2008, Smith led the NFL in receiving yards per game and had 1,421 yards in just 14 games. He did it on the Panthers offense that ranked dead last in the entire league in pass attempts. Greg Cosell pointed out that Smith and Isaac Bruce are the only players in the 16-game era to lead the league in receiving yards while playing on a team in the bottom 5 in pass attempts. 3 years after his Triple Crown, he was still at the top of his game, dominating in a system designed to hide receivers. But we still haven't gotten to his most impressive skill set just yet. If you know Steve Smith, like we mentioned before, you know the "ice up son" quote. That happened after he torched Aqib Talib on a Monday Night Football game in 2013. There was also the time he destroyed Fred Smoot for 201 yards and a touchdown, then celebrated with a rowboat dance mocking the Vikings' love boat scandal. After he shredded Janoris Jenkins, Smith told reporters that Jenkins was just another notch on his bedpost and told him,
If I see him in the street, I'm gonna bust him in his mouth.
The league noticed. His peers voted him the funniest trash talkers in the NFL, and they also voted him one of the players they'd least like to fight. That combination is almost unheard of. Usually you're either one or the other. Steve was both, and that made him unforgettable, but it also turned him into a cartoon character in the eyes of a lot of fans and media. People remembered the mouth and the stiff arm more than they remembered the third down conversions. We let the personality distract us from the production. The Ken Lucas fight in 2008 training camp is a perfect example. Smith broke his teammate's nose during practice and earned a 2-game suspension. When he came back and scored his first touchdown, he handed the ball to Lucas on the sideline. That's him in a nutshell, but the league covers explosion more than actual football. The fight in training camp got way more coverage than the actual touchdowns because the conversion against the Falcons on third down doesn't really mean that much. Even his touchdown celebrations were calculated. His moments after the game, too, the "ice up son" moment wasn't just a random insult. It was the end of a personal feud that started because Talib talked trash first. Smith never started fires for no reason, but he always finished them. That reputation for being difficult made it easier for analysts and fans to leave him out of top 5 lists, because including him meant dealing with the personality, and a lot of people preferred cleaner narratives. No stiff arms were genuinely nasty. Smith didn't run away from defenders, he ran through them. When a corner tried to bring him down in the open field, he'd throw that right arm out and shove them to the ground. He had people like a running back, and at 5'9", that made no sense to anyone who tried to tackle him. But here's the problem. All that personality made him easy to dismiss when people talked about all-time greats. We bring up Steve Smith in barbershop debates, someone will say he doesn't have the dominant stretch that Maltz or Calvin had. But from 2005 to 2008, playing with Jake Delhomme, Smith averaged 101.3 yards from scrimmage and scored 38 touchdowns in 48 games. That is a dominant stretch. In 2008, he led the NFL in receiving yards per game like we mentioned on a team that was dead last in pass attempts. Rondé Barber, who made 5 Pro Bowls and won a Super Bowl, said Smith was the toughest receiver he ever faced. Ike Taylor said the same thing. Larry Fitzgerald once said there was no better man-to-man route runner in the league than Steve Smith. These aren't casual compliments. The problem was that Smith's reputation as a hothead made it easier for fans to remember the fights instead of the numbers. Because of his antics and aids by the end of the 2013 season, the Panthers decided they had had enough. In March of 2014, they decided to release him after 13 seasons. He left as a franchise all-time leader in receptions with 836, receiving yards with 12,197, and total touchdowns with 67. The organization that drafted him and watched him become a star decided it was time to officially move on. Smith was 35 years old, and in the NFL, that usually means retirement is coming fast. Instead, he signed a 3-year deal with the Baltimore Ravens worth $11.5 million and promised revenge on the field. Before his first season in Baltimore, Smith told reporters that if he played against Carolina, people should put your goggles on and there's going to be blood and guts everywhere. He wasn't joking. In week 4 of the 2014 season, Smith faced the Panthers and absolutely destroyed them. He caught 7 passes for 139 yards and 2 TDs, including a 61-yard score and a falling catch in the back of the end zone while being held by a defender. Ravens won 38-10, and Smith spent the whole game reminding his old team exactly what they had given up. That season, he finished with over 70 catches for 1,065 yards and 6 touchdowns, which made it his 8th 1,000-yard season. He also helped the Ravens beat the Steelers in the playoffs. In 2015, Smith announced that it would be his final year, and he was playing at a high level with 46 catches for 670 yards and 3 touchdowns in just 7 games. Then in week 8 against the Chargers, he tore his Achilles. At 36 years old with the torn Achilles and a retirement announcement already, most people assumed that was the end. They assumed wrong again. In December of 2015, he announced he was coming back for the 2016 season. 37 years old, less than a year after tearing his Achilles, he caught 70 passes for 799 yards and 5 TDs. He passed Andre Johnson to become the NFL's active leader in receiving yards, and he became just the 14th player in NFL history to reach 1,000 career receptions. In January 2017, he officially retired. He didn't just come back from a torn Achilles at 36, he came back and kept producing at a level most healthy 27-year-olds can't even reach. The Ravens weren't signing Smith for charity. They needed a number 1 receiver, and Smith gave them everything he had left. John Harbaugh said before the season that Smith was one of the guys you hoped to coach someday, and he got his chance. But even with all his stats and memorable moments, he's still not in the Hall of Fame. When Steve Smith retired in 2017, he had numbers comparable to other Hall of Famers. He's top 8 in all-time receiving yards and top 12 in receptions. He scored 81 receiving touchdowns and added 2 on the ground, 4 on punt returns and 2 on kick returns. He and Tim Brown are the only players with at least 1,000 receptions who scored touchdowns on runs, catches, punt returns, and kick returns. He was a weapon every time he touched the ball. The postseason numbers are even more telling. Among players ranked in the top 25 for career playoff receiving yards, Smith's average of 91 yards per game ranks first all time by the time he retired. Michael Irvin was second at 82.2 and Jerry Rice was third at 77.4. Steve reached the end zone or topped 100 yards from scrimmage in 10 of his 11 career playoff games. The only exception was a game where the Panthers ran the ball 40 times and passed 14. When they actually threw the ball in January, he delivered every single time. Franchise quarterback for most of his career. He lost 2004 to a broken leg and 2010 to a bad quarterback play with Jimmy Clausen on the 2-14 team. John Gruden once said Smith's best plays might be more impressive than anybody's. And yet in 2025, Smith didn't make the cut for the Pro Football Hall of Fame in his first year as a finalist. The snub fits the pattern of his entire career. The respect never quite arrives on time. The question isn't whether Steve Smith deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. The question is why we're still debating whether a guy with a Triple Crown, over 14,000 receiving yards, and the best playoff receiving average in NFL history by the time he retired, doesn't belong in top 5 conversation. Everything shows he does belong there. That intensity is rare, and it produced results that stand up against anyone in the conversation. The most disrespected legend in NFL history isn't just a line. It's a fact backed up by 16 years of production. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.